I want you to picture a Saturday afternoon in September. The light through the venue windows is doing exactly what I hoped it would do when I first walked through the space 2 years earlier: gold and low and generous. The kind of light that makes everyone look like they're being remembered rather than photographed. The tables are set. The flowers are right. The string quartet is warming up in the corner, playing something I can't quite identify from where I'm standing. Something that sounds like it belongs in a room with original brick walls and 20-foot ceilings and the particular quality of silence that old buildings hold even when they're full of sound. And my mother-in-law is standing at the entrance hall with a rolled seating chart in her hands, telling the venue coordinator, my venue coordinator, the woman I hired, the woman who has my cell number saved in her phone under owner, that there has been a mistake and the chart needs to be redone before guests arrive. I am standing 12 feet away. My name is not on the chart. I am the bride. I own the bride. I own the building. I let her finish her sentence. My name is Sloane Merritt. I am 29 years old. I work in commercial real estate, which means I spend my professional life looking at spaces and calculating what they could become if handled correctly, valued correctly, financed correctly, repositioned with care and patience and an accurate reading of what the market will bear. I have been doing this since I was 23 years old. I think, reasonably good at it. I am very good at identifying the gap between what something appears to be worth and what it actually is. I notice this gap in properties. I notice it in situations. I notice it in people. I noticed it in Claudette Ashford within about 45 minutes of meeting her. But I am getting ahead of myself. The beginning is where the shape becomes clear, and I am a woman who needs to understand the foundation before she can explain the structure. I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, the daughter of a high school history teacher and a woman who managed the front desk of a pediatric dental office with more organizational competence than most executives I have since worked alongside. We were not wealthy. We were comfortable in the way that two-income households with careful habits are comfortable. There was enough. There was planning. There was a particular security that comes from knowing exactly what you have and not spending beyond it. I absorbed this early. I saved my first paycheck at 16. I tracked my expenses in a notebook at 19. By the time I was a junior in college, studying finance at the College of Charleston, I had a spreadsheet that projected my net worth at 10-year intervals based on 3 different saving scenarios. The middle scenario made me feel ambitious. The aggressive scenario made me feel possible. I graduated in 2017 and went directly into commercial real estate analysis at a mid-sized brokerage in Charleston. The work was, at its core, about pattern recognition, learning to see a property not as it existed but as it could exist, under different ownership, with different capital, with a repositioning strategy built on accurate data rather than sentiment. I was 22 years old and I had never been happier in my professional life. I had found the work I was built for, and the work was teaching me things I would not have been able to learn any other way. How deals are structured, how loans are underwritten, how distressed assets move through the market, how to read a financial model, and find the place where the assumptions have been made to do too much of the work. I saved 35% of my take-home without exceptions from my first year. Not because I had a specific goal in mind, not yet, but because I knew, in the way that you know things you can't fully articulate at 22, that the opportunity would come and I needed to be liquid when it did. I met Will Ashford at a mutual friend's birthday dinner in October of 2020. He was funny in a quiet way, thoughtful, the kind of man who listens more than he talks in a group setting and says something precise and unexpected when he finally does. He worked in healthcare administration. He was interested in my job in a way that felt genuine rather than polite. We dated for 6 months before he brought me home to meet his family. The Ashfords live in Mount Pleasant, a large traditional home that sits at the end of a long driveway and announces itself with the particular confidence of a family that has been comfortable for long enough that comfort has become aesthetic. Claudette Ashford is the kind of woman who has spent 30 years becoming indistinguishable from her surroundings. She chairs 2 charitable boards. She manages the household with considerable attention to its surfaces. She has been married to Will's father, a semi-retired orthodontist, since she was 24 years old. And she wears the Ashford name the way some women wear inherited jewelry, as though it was always meant for them, as though the fact that it was given and not earned is a distinction without practical consequence. The first family dinner was April of 2021. The meal was lovely, catered, technically though, presented as home cooked, a distinction I noticed and filed without comment. At some point in the first hour, Claudette asked about my parents. I told her my father taught high school history and my mother managed a pediatric dental office. Claudette smiled. She said, "How lovely. Stable work." The word stable is doing significant labor in that sentence. She did not mean it as a neutral descriptor. She meant it as a ceiling, a gentle, warm, well-dressed ceiling placed over the top of my family's ambitions. Stable. As opposed to impressive, as opposed to what the Ashfords had, which was, she seemed to believe, a different category of existence entirely. She then turned to Will and asked about a college friend's family beach house and whether they were still invited in August. And the moment passed the way these moments pass, without drama, without confrontation, absorbed into the surface of the conversation like a stone into still water. I noted it. I did not say anything about it. I was sitting at someone else's dinner table for the first time, and I am not a woman who argues about ceilings in the first hour of a relationship. I'm a woman who looks at a ceiling and starts thinking about what's above it. 3 weeks later, in March of 2021, I bought Linden Hall. I want to explain what Linden Hall is because the space matters for understanding why I bought it and what it became. It is a 19th-century cotton warehouse on the edge of downtown Charleston. 6,400 square feet of original brick interior, 20-foot ceilings, wide plank heart pine floors that had been covered with industrial carpet for decades and were revealed during a renovation project in 2006 to be extraordinary. The previous owner had converted it into an event venue in 2012 and run it profitably through 2019. When the pandemic hit and event bookings evaporated overnight, the business couldn't sustain the loan payments on the building. By mid-2020, it was in default. By January 2021, it was on the market at $620,000, and I was the person looking at it. I walked through it on a Tuesday afternoon in February. The renovation had been partially undone by 18 months of vacancy, some water damage in the rear section, an HVAC system that needed replacement, the catering kitchen outdated. But the bones were extraordinary. The brick was original. The light at 4 in the afternoon came through the west-facing windows and did exactly what I knew it would do. Gold and low and generous. The way only warehouse light in a building that has been standing for 150 years can be. I stood in the center of the main hall and I thought, this is severely undervalued. And I also thought, which surprised me slightly, I want this. I had $58,000 in liquid savings. The down payment on a $620,000 commercial property at a standard loan-to-value ratio required 40%, $248,000, which I did not have. What I did have was a 4-year track record at a commercial real estate brokerage, a debt-to-income ratio that made lenders comfortable, a direct relationship with my firm's preferred lender, and enough knowledge of how commercial loans get structured to know that there are alternative paths. My supervisor, a woman who had been in Charleston commercial real estate for 25 years and who looked at my offer memo with the expression of someone recognizing something familiar, told me the deal was solid. The lender agreed to a structure that required my $58,000 as a down payment, supplemented by a renovation line of credit secured against the property for the build-out. The acquisition closed in March 2021. I formed a single-member LLC for the purchase, Merritt Property Holdings. It was named for me. It held title to the building. It was not a secret, it was simply mine. And I am a person who finds no particular need to announce what she owns. The renovation took the rest of 2021. I hired a property management company to oversee the build-out and the eventual operations. New HVAC, the original brick cleaned and repointed, the heart pine floors refinished, a complete lighting system designed for the event market, the catering kitchen brought up to current code. The renovation line totaled $94,000 and was drawn over 7 months. By December 2021, the space looked the way I had always known it could look. which is to say, like itself, at its best in the right light. Linden Hall reopened in January 2022 as a boutique heritage event venue. Within 8 months, it was booking at 80% weekend capacity. By the end of 2022, it was generating $310,000 in gross annual revenue. My property management company handled the day-to-day operations, the bookings, the coordinator staff, the vendor relationships. I reviewed the financials monthly. I made the decisions that required ownership. Everything else ran without me needing to be visible. I want to tell you about Maya, because she is important to what happens later. Maya is the venue coordinator at Linden Hall. She was hired in the first quarter of 2022 and is, at this point, the best operational person I have ever worked with in any context. She is organized in the specific way that people are organized when they actually understand the work, rather than simply managing it. She knows every vendor by name, every preferred caterer's lead time, every quirk of the building's climate control system. She has my cell number saved in her phone under Owner, which is accurate and which she uses without ceremony when something requires my decision. She is warm to clients and precise with logistics and does not permit confusion in either direction. I trust her completely. I trusted her before I knew exactly how much I would need to. Will proposed in November of 2022. We had been together for 2 years, and I knew approximately 8 months into it that this was the person. So the proposal was, in the way it is when you are paying attention, both a surprise and not one at all. He proposed at a restaurant we had gone to on our first date, which was embarrassing only in the sense that I was wearing a work blazer and had my laptop bag under the table, and he had been planning it for 3 months, and I had no idea, which is the only time in our relationship that Will has significantly outflanked me on information asymmetry. I intend to remain vigilant. I suggested Linden Hall for the wedding almost immediately. I told Will I loved the space and could get us a good rate through my professional connections. He accepted this without further inquiry, which tells you something about Will. Not that he is incurious, but that he trusts me, and that trust, in this case, did not compel him to ask the specific follow-up question that would have clarified everything. I had been thinking about how to tell him the full story. I had decided, for reasons that are their own kind of story, that the wedding itself was not the right moment. I would tell him after. I told him after. Wedding planning began in January 2023. The wedding was set for September. 9 months of planning, which is enough time to build something well or to let things drift, depending on who is doing the building and how much they care about the structure. Claudette cared about the structure. She cared about it the way she cared about everything that bore the Ashford name, with a completeness that left little space for the people inside it. In February, at an early planning dinner at the Ashford house, she placed on the table a list of venues she had prepared, 7 options, all of which she had personal connections to, several of which were managed by women on her charitable boards. She presented this list as a starting point. I told her I already had a venue in mind. She said, "Oh, we should probably use somewhere with a reputation, sweetheart. It's a first impression. You want people to recognize the name." I told her the venue was Linden Hall. She said she wasn't familiar with it. She said this in the specific tone of a woman who considers her own unfamiliarity with something to be useful data about that thing's quality. I told her I thought she'd love it. We moved on. She did not ask how I had arranged access. The guest list came in March. Claudette presented it at a dinner, 187 names, formatted in a table, organized by family branch and relationship category. Of the 187 names, 140 were from the Ashford side. When I noted the imbalance, Claudette said, "Well, we have a larger family and a larger community. It's just the reality." She paused. She said, "Your people are welcome, of course. We just want to make sure the people who matter to the Ashfords are there. Your people." I wrote that phrase in my journal that night, not because it wounded me. It did some, but that is not why I wrote it. I wrote it because it was precise. It told me, with considerable clarity, what Claudette believed the architecture of this wedding to be, an Ashford event accessed through Will, attended by family and community, and the social infrastructure she had spent 30 years cultivating, with Sloane Merritt somewhere in the frame as a warm and presentable addition. I adjusted the seating chart to accommodate the guest list. I noted, without particular drama, that in the adjusted version my name did not appear. I was on the chart as an absence. The bride and groom circulate, don't they? They don't really need a seat. I was busy. I let it go. I had other things in motion. In the months before the wedding, Claudette managed the venue with the confidence of a woman who had organized many events and assumed this one was no different. She called Maya on at least 6 occasions that I am aware of. She sent 4 emails to the Linden Hall operations address with adjustments and preferences, centerpiece heights, the timing of cocktail hour, a request to move the string quartet from the corner to a different corner and then back again. She would me on 2 of them. She directed all of them to Maya as though Maya answered to her, which Maya did not, because Maya answered to me, and Maya handled each of Claudette's requests with professional warmth while flagging them to me quietly and doing what I actually wanted. Claudette never once asked who owned the building. The question simply did not occur to her. In her mental model of how the world was arranged, Sloane Merritt was a girl from a stable background who had a contact at a nice venue. The idea that the contact and the owner might be the same person was not a possibility she was entertaining, because she was not entertaining Sloane Merritt as the kind of person who owns things. I want to tell you what that is like, to be managed in your own building by a woman who has decided that the range of your capabilities ends before property ownership begins. It is not precisely humiliating. It is more like watching someone read a map of a place you know by heart and giving you confident directions. You let them give the directions. You go where you were already planning to go. You say thank you. September arrived, the week before the wedding was, the week I had been looking forward to and quietly apprehending in equal measure. The vendor logistics were in order. Maya had handled all of it with the systematic precision I had come to rely on completely. The catering was confirmed. The florals were confirmed. The string quartet had been briefed. I had approved the final floor plan in late August, and the setup was scheduled for the Friday before the Saturday wedding. I drove out to Linden Hall on Friday afternoon to walk the space before the setup crew finished. This is a thing I had done every few months since the renovation. Simply walk the building, see how it was holding up, feel the particular quality of quiet that old brick walls sustain, even when everything around them is in motion. The floors were clean, the brick gleamed in the late afternoon light, the florist's preliminary arrangements were in place, the tables were positioned according to the floor plan I had approved. Everything was correct. I stood in the center of the main hall for a few minutes and let myself feel, quietly, something that I don't have a clean word for. Something between pride and tenderness and the specific satisfaction of a thing that went the way you planned it when the plan required years. The morning of the wedding was September 16th. I was at the venue by 9, before most of the setup crew arrived. I went through the space. I spoke with Maya. I handled 2 small operational questions that had come up overnight. Then I went to get ready. Claudette arrived at 11, which was an hour before she was expected, with the seating chart rolled under her arm and Vonnie slightly behind her and the particular momentum of a woman who has decided she is in charge of the morning. I was in the bridal suite with my mother and my 2 bridesmaids. Maya texted me at 11:15. Claudette is here with the chart. We'll flag if anything comes up. Something came up at 11:40. Maya texted, "Can you come to the entrance hall when you have a moment?" I finished having my veil pinned. I walked down the corridor in my dress, which was a thing I had not planned to do until the ceremony, but the dress was not the point, and the corridor was mine, and I was used to walking it. I came into the entrance hall. Claudette was standing near the entrance doors with the seating chart, speaking to Maya in the assured tone of a woman explaining a correction. She was saying that the chart needed to be redone before guests arrived, that there was an issue with the arrangement, that several things were not as she had specified. Maya was listening with the expression she uses when she is professionally absorbing information she does not intend to act on. I stood 12 feet away and listened. I let Claudette finish her sentence. Then I looked at Maya, and Maya looked at me, and I nodded slightly, which is the shorthand we had developed over a year of working together for, "I'm here, I've got it, thank you. What I had not yet seen was what had happened in the 4 minutes before I arrived. Maya told me afterward. Standard procedure at Linden Hall is to prepare the final event invoice on the morning of the event and present it to the booking client for signature before the doors open. The invoice covers the facility fee, staff costs, catering coordination, and any additional charges incurred. It is addressed to the client of record. The client of record for this event was Merritt Property Holdings, LLC. The booking contact listed on the invoice was Sloane Merritt, owner. Maya had come into the entrance hall with the invoice on a clipboard, looking for me. Claudette was the first person she encountered. She held out the clipboard to Claudette, in the natural assumption that a family member in the entrance hall of an event space could pass a document along. She said, "Mrs. Ashford, I just need a signature from the owner on the final invoice before we open the doors." Claudette took the clipboard. She read the top of the invoice. She read it again. Her face, Maya told me, went very still. Not upset. Not yet, just still. In the particular way a face goes still when it is being asked to process something that does not fit any of its existing categories. She looked up at Maya and said, "I think there's been a mistake on this." Maya said pleasantly, "I don't think so. That's our standard client invoice. Sloane can sign it when she has a moment." Claudette said, "Sloane." "Not a question." Maya said, "Yes, she's the owner of record, Miss Merritt." This is where I arrived. Claudette was mid-sentence about the seating chart. I was standing 12 feet away in my dress. I let her finish. Then Maya caught my eye and walked toward me and handed me the clipboard. I looked at the invoice. I had seen it in draft 2 days prior. It was correct. It was standard. It was addressed to Merritt Property Holdings, LLC, with my name beneath it in the venue's clean sans serif typeface. I took the pen from the clipboard. I signed the bottom line. I handed it back to Maya and said, "Thank you, Maya." Then I looked at Claudette. She was holding the rolled seating chart. She had heard my name said by Maya in the context of owner of record. She was watching me hand back a signed invoice and my wedding dress in the entrance hall of a building she had been managing for 8 months. I could see the precise moment the thing she had assumed about the architecture of this situation revised itself, not dramatically, not loudly, just structurally, quietly. She walked toward me. She held the clipboard out again. She had taken it back from Maya. Or Maya had returned it to her. The order of that exchange is unclear to me. She said quietly enough that only Vani and I could hear, "It says you're the owner." I said, "I bought it in 2021. I thought it would be a good investment." I paused. I let that sit for exactly as long as it needed to. Then I said, "I also added a seat for myself at the head table. You can adjust the chart." I did not raise my voice. I did not smile in a particular way. I turned back toward the window, and the florist's assistant, who was making a final adjustment to the entrance arrangement. A small thing with eucalyptus that needed one stem moved 2 inches to the left, and I watched her make the adjustment. "Behind me," Claudette said, to no one in the room specifically. "I don't understand. Will, did you know about this?" Will was not in the room. He was in the groom's suite with his groomsmen, 40 feet down the corridor, unaware of any of this, preparing for a wedding. Vani was in the room. Vani looked at the invoice. She looked at her mother. She looked at me from behind. She said nothing. One of the Ashford aunts who had just arrived, having heard enough to understand that something had shifted without fully understanding the nature of the shift, said, "Should we? Are we going to get to our seats?" The doors opened at 1 o'clock. The guests arrived in the gold September light. The string quartet shifted to the processional piece, the one I had selected, the one I had approved, played in the space I owned with the acoustic properties I had assessed before I signed the purchase agreement, because even then, even 2 years before my wedding, I was already thinking about what the room would sound like full of people I loved. I walked down the aisle of Linden Hall in my father's arm, my father, the history teacher, who had pressed my hand very hard before we started walking and said nothing because there was nothing to say. And I did not look at Claudette's face. I looked at Will. who was standing at the end of the aisle in a dark suit with the expression of a man who has just seen the person he is going to spend his life with come around a corner in a building he doesn't know, his wife owns, and I want to tell you. He looked right. The ceremony was 22 minutes. I had timed it. Of course I had timed it. At the head table there were 13 seats. The 12th had been added that morning, on my instruction, when I texted Maya at 6 a.m. to confirm the arrangement. The 13th was a late addition from Claudette's family, accommodated without drama. My seat was between Will's and my maid of honors. My name was on the place card in the same handwriting as everyone else's. The chart had been corrected. Claudette was seated at the head table. She was composed throughout the reception in the way she is always composed in public. She is not a woman who lets things surface in company, and I respect that about her even when I do not respect the things she is suppressing. She did not make her usual round of introductions. She stayed in her seat longer than I had observed her to stay in any seat at any social occasion. She ate. She spoke to the people immediately adjacent to her. She was present in the way a person is present when they are working very hard to appear unaffected. I danced with my husband. I laughed at the right moments, and some of the wrong ones, which is more honest. I gave a toast that was warm and specific and contained no references to property holdings or operating agreements or the correct way to read a commercial real estate invoice. I was, for the entire reception, entirely and visibly at home, which I was, after all, because I was in my own building, on the honeymoon, Amalfi Coast, 10 days, a trip I had been planning in my head since I was 24 and adding to a savings sub-account since 27. I told Will. We were on a terrace on the 4th day, with the kind of view that makes you feel like you are briefly living inside someone's idea of a perfect afternoon, and I said, I need to tell you something about Linden Hall. He put down his coffee. I told him. He laughed. He went quiet. He looked out at the water for a moment. Then he said, How long have you been waiting to sign that invoice? I said, About 40 minutes. He laughed again. He reached across the table and took my hand. He said, I married the right person. I said, I know. He said, How do I tell my mother? I said, She already knows. He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, Right. And we finished our coffee, and the view was still there, and the afternoon was still perfect, and we did not talk about Claudette again for the rest of the honeymoon, which was the correct amount of time to not talk about her. Claudette called Will 3 weeks after we returned. The conversation lasted 40 minutes, which I know because I was in the next room looking at a property listing in North Charleston and watching the timer on his phone through the doorway. Will came out after and said, She wants to have dinner. I said, Okay. We went to dinner. It was careful and surface level, and Claudette complimented the wedding flowers and the venue's lighting and said it was a beautiful space. She did not say anything else about the space. She did not say anything about the invoice or the seating chart or the 32 months she spent managing a property she had never thought to inquire about. We had dessert. We drove home. Will said, That was fine. I said, Yes, it was, more or less. Vonnie texted me 2 months after the wedding. I want to tell you about this text, because it is the part of the aftermath I have thought about most carefully. It was a Tuesday morning. I was standing in my kitchen making coffee. My phone lit up. The text read, I looked up Linden Hall. It's really beautiful. You did a good job with it. It was the first time Vonnie had ever complimented me on something that was mine, not something adjacent to Will, not something about the wedding that could be attributed to the Ashford family's event, something mine that I had built, that she had looked up on her own time and seen clearly enough to say so. I read it twice. I wrote back, Thank you. That means something. I meant it more than I expected to. I have thought in the months since about what Claudette saw when she looked at me across her dinner table in 2021. A teacher's daughter, a girl from a stable background, someone whose value, in her construction of things, was borrowed from her proximity to Will, and would remain borrowed for as long as she was managed correctly. She was not, I have come to understand, a cruel woman. She was a woman with a very fixed idea of how things were ordered, and in her ordering system, I did not belong at the top of the table. The arrangement was not personal, it was structural. I simply did not fit the structure she had built. What I know now, and what I think she is beginning to understand, is that the structure was never mine to fit. It was always mine to rewrite. I just needed to wait until I owned the room. The part that stays with me, the part I return to most often when I think about those 3 years, is not the invoice or the seating chart or the moment in the entrance hall. It is something quieter than that. For 2 years, Claudette called my coordinator, adjusted my floor plan, redirected requests to my staff, and moved through my building with the complete confidence of a woman who understood the arrangement. She managed the details of my venue without once asking the most basic question of who held the deed. She assumed it wasn't me. She had decided, somewhere in the first 45 minutes of knowing me, that I was not the kind of person who owns things. And that assumption shaped everything she noticed, and everything she failed to notice for the 32 months that followed. That assumption was the most expensive mistake she made. Not financially. I mean costly in the way that incorrect assumptions are always costly, which is that they prevent you from seeing what is actually in front of you. And eventually what is actually in front of you signs an invoice and turns back to the window. I listed Linden Hall for sale in early 2025. I had identified a larger property. A former textile mill in North Charleston with structural bones that made me stop walking mid-tour and just stand there for a moment, the way I had stood in Linden Hall's main hall in February of 2021. The listing price for Linden Hall is $1.1 million. I paid $620,000 and spent $94,000 in renovation. The asset performed exactly as I modeled it. I am ready for the next one. I have not told Claudette about the sale. She will see it eventually. The listing is public, as listings are. When she does, she will understand something she did not know to look for before. I do not know what she will do with it. I find that I am not particularly concerned either way. I have my own transactions to manage. She left me off the seating chart in a building where my name was on the deed. I have decided, and I mean this with more generosity than it might sound, that this is actually the most honest thing she ever did, because it showed me, with perfect precision, exactly how little she had been paying attention for 3 years, and exactly how much room that left me to work with. I want to ask you something before I go, because I think about this more than I expected to when I started telling this story. Has someone ever managed you? Not mistreated you. Managed you, organized you, arranged you, made decisions around you and about you, without ever once asking what you were actually capable of? Has someone ever looked at you and decided, from the surface of things, that the full inventory of your life could be described by what they already knew about people who looked like you? Because I want to know how long you let it go on, and whether the moment of correction was what you expected, or whether it was quieter and more final and ultimately less about them than you thought it would be. I let it go on for 3 years. The morning it ended, I signed an invoice, added 1 sentence, and turned back to the window. The paperwork was already in order. It had been in order since 2021. I just had to wait until it was time to hand someone the clipboard.